The telegram had arrived at sunrise, but Florence Kenway already knew what it would say before she tore it open with flour-dusted fingers in her bakery kitchen. Another suitor had withdrawn his proposal upon learning she intended to keep her business after marriage. She crumpled the paper and tossed it into the oven's flames, watching the words burn as Austin's morning heat already pressed against the windows of her shop. It was 1882, and Florence had committed the unforgivable sin of choosing her work over finding a husband. At 24, she should have been married with children, not kneading dough at 4 in the morning and balancing ledgers by lamplight. Her bakery, Kenway's Fine Breads, had become the best in Austin, Texas, supplying restaurants, hotels, and families throughout the city. She had built something real with her own 2 hands after her father died, and left her nothing but debt and a crumbling storefront. 5 years of work had transformed that ruin into prosperity, and she would be damned before she handed it over to some man who saw her success as something to absorb into his own name. The women of Austin had made their feelings clear. They crossed the street rather than greet her. They whispered in church about her unnatural ambitions. Mrs. Patterson had actually told her to her face that a woman who valued commerce over family was barely a woman at all. Even her own mother had stopped visiting, ashamed that her daughter refused every proposal that came with the condition of giving up her livelihood. Florence pulled the morning's first loaves from the oven, their crusts golden and perfect. The familiar satisfaction warmed her chest despite the loneliness that had become her constant companion. She had made her choice, and she would live with it, even if it meant living alone. The bell above her shop door chimed at 6 o'clock sharp. Florence wiped her hands on her apron and emerged from the kitchen, expecting old Mr. Chen, who always bought 2 sourdough loaves for his restaurant. Instead, a cowboy stood in her doorway, hat in his hands, dust from the trail still coating his boots and the legs of his worn denim pants. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and when he met her gaze, something in her chest tightened unexpectedly. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice rough but polite. "I apologize for my appearance. Just rode in from driving cattle up from San Antonio. Heard your bakery opens earliest in Austin, and I have not eaten anything but trail food for 2 weeks." Florence found herself smoothing her apron, suddenly aware of her own flour-streaked appearance. "You heard correctly. What can I get for you?" "Everything," he said, and a hint of a smile touched his lips. "Or whatever you recommend. I have been dreaming about real bread for days." She filled a basket with fresh rolls, a loaf of wheat bread, and 2 cinnamon buns that were still warm. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed, and she felt heat that had nothing to do with the ovens. "How much do I owe you?" he asked. 75 cents. He paid and took a bite of a cinnamon bun immediately, closing his eyes in obvious pleasure. "Lord have mercy," he murmured. "This is the best thing I have ever tasted." Despite herself, Florence smiled. "You must have been on the trail a long time if you think that is the best." "No, madam." He opened his eyes and looked at her directly. "I have eaten in fancy restaurants in New Orleans and San Francisco. This is genuinely the best." He extended his hand. "Mason Garrett, I am the new foreman at the Triple Creek Ranch outside town." She hesitated only a moment before shaking his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but careful. "Florence Kenway, I own this bakery." "You own it?" Interest sparked in his eyes. "That is impressive. How long have you been in business?" Most men ask that question with skepticism or disapproval. Mason Garrett asked like he genuinely wanted to know. 5 years, she said. "Started with nothing but my father's debts and determination." "I know something about that," he he said quietly. Built myself up from nothing too. Started as a ranch hand at 15, saved every penny, learned everything I could. Just got offered this foreman position last month. It is a good opportunity. They talked while he ate another roll, the conversation flowing easily in a way Florence had not experienced with any man in Austin. Mason asked about her business with genuine interest, nodding thoughtfully as she explained how she had developed relationships with local restaurants and hotels, how she had experimented with recipes until she found the ones that set her apart. You should be proud, he said. Building something from nothing takes real courage. My mother ran a boarding house after my father died. She taught me that hard work has no gender. Florence felt something crack open inside her chest. Most men in this town do not share that view. Then most men in this town are fools, Mason said simply. The bell chimed again, and Mr. Chen entered. Florence served him his usual order while Mason finished his breakfast. When Mr. Chen left, Mason lingered by the counter. Miss Kenway, would it be all right if I came back tomorrow morning? I will be in town for a few days before heading back to the ranch, and I would rather give you my business than some hotel restaurant. You are welcome anytime, Florence said, trying to keep her voice steady. He put his hat back on, tipping it to her. Until tomorrow, then. After he left, Florence stood in the empty shop, her heart beating faster than it should. She told herself not to be foolish. He was just a polite customer, nothing more. But when Mason Garrett walked through her door the next morning with that same warm smile, she felt hope flicker to life, despite her best efforts to smother it. Mason came every morning for a week. He timed his visits for the quiet hour between opening and the breakfast rush, and they talked while he ate. Florence learned that he was 26, that he had a younger sister who taught school in Houston, that he loved horses and open sky and the satisfaction of a hard day's work well done. He asked her about recipes and business strategies, about her dreams for expanding the bakery, about the books she read by lamplight after closing. On the 8th morning, he asked if he could walk her home after she closed the shop. Florence's practical mind told her to say no. Getting involved with anyone meant risking the pain of another rejection when he inevitably asked her to choose. But her heart, long starved for genuine connection, overruled her caution. I close at 6, she told him. He was waiting outside when she locked up that evening, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. Austin's summer heat had mellowed into pleasant warmth, and they walked slowly through streets gilded with sunset light. Mason matched his pace to hers, his arm occasionally brushing her shoulder in a way that made her skin tingle. The other ranch hands asked me where I have been eating breakfast every morning, Mason said as they walked. I told them about your bakery. You might see an increase in business. I appreciate that, Florence said, though I doubt their wives will appreciate them patronizing the spinster who values money over marriage. Mason stopped walking. Is that what people say about you? She met his gaze steadily. Among other things. I have turned down 4 marriage proposals in 3 years. Each man wanted me to sell my bakery after the wedding. Each man expected me to understand that his pride could not accommodate a wife who worked. The women of Austin have made their judgment clear. And what do you say about yourself? Mason asked quietly. I say that I worked too hard to build something just to hand it over. I say that marriage should not require a woman to erase herself. Her voice shook slightly. I say that I am tired of being punished for wanting both love and purpose. Mason stepped closer, his eyes intense in the fading light. What if you could have both? That is not how the world works, Mr. Garrett, not for women. It is how my world works, he said. Florence, I have spent this week falling for you. Your intelligence, your determination, your passion for what you have built. I would not change a single thing about you, including your bakery. Especially your bakery. It is part of who you are." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you wake before dawn because you take pride in your work. I know you remember every customer's usual order. I know you donated bread to the church charity dinner even after those same church women snubbed you. I know that when you talk about developing a new recipe, your whole face lights up. I know that you are the strongest woman I have ever met, and I am already half in love with you." Tears burned Florence's eyes. "Mason, I cannot give up my bakery, I cannot." "I am not asking you to," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am asking you to keep it. To keep being exactly who you are, to let me stand beside you and support what you have built instead of trying to tear it down." "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you want a wife who works?" "Because I want you," he said simply. "All of you. The woman who runs a successful business, and the woman who laughs at my terrible jokes, and the woman who gets flour in her hair and does not notice. I want a partner, not a possession. I want someone who challenges me and inspires me and builds something meaningful with her life." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Choose me, Florence, and keep your work. I promise you will never have to pick between the two." Florence could not speak around the tightness in her throat. Every wall she had built around her heart was crumbling, and she was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. "I am scared," she admitted. "What if you change your mind? What if you wake up one day and decide you cannot bear the gossip and the judgment?" "Then I will tell the gossips to mind their own business," Mason said. "Florence, I grew up watching my mother work herself to exhaustion to keep us fed. I watched people look down on her for doing what she had to do. I learned early that the world's opinion is worth less than nothing compared to integrity and courage. You have both in abundance." He squeezed her hand gently. "I am not asking you to trust me overnight. I am asking you to let me prove myself. Let me court you properly. Let me show you that I mean every word." She looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her bakery like an answer to prayers she had been afraid to speak aloud. His eyes held nothing but sincerity and warmth, and something that made her pulse race. "All right," she said softly. "Court me properly, Mason Garrett. But I am warning you now that I will work long hours and smell like yeast and probably bore you with talk of profit margins." He grinned, and it transformed his whole face. "I love yeast smell, and profit margins fascinate me. We are going to get along perfectly." He walked her to her door behind the bakery and left with a tip of his hat and a promise to see her in the morning. Florence leaned against her closed door, pressing her hand to her racing heart, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have everything she wanted. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Florence had experienced before. Mason treated her business not as competition or embarrassment, but as something worthy of respect and interest. He asked intelligent questions about her suppliers and recipes, offered suggestions from his own experience managing ranch finances, and never once implied that her work was anything less than important. He also courted her with a romance that made her feel treasured in ways she had never imagined. He brought her wildflowers picked from the prairie outside town. He took her to dinner at Austin's best restaurant and talked to her like her opinions mattered. He held her hand during evening walks and looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in Texas. The town's reaction was predictable. The gossip intensified. Women whispered that Florence had finally found a man as unsuitable as herself. Men at the saloon told Mason he was a fool for taking on a woman who would never be properly domestic. Mrs. Patterson actually approached them outside church to say that their relationship was a poor example for young women who needed to learn their proper place. Mason listened politely until she finished, then said in a voice of steel wrapped in velvet, "Madam, I believe young women need examples of strength and independence, not subservience. Florence is the finest example I can imagine. Now, if you will excuse us, we have a picnic to attend." He offered Florence his arm and walked away, leaving Mrs. Patterson sputtering on the church steps. Florence had to press her face against his shoulder to muffle her laughter. "You are going to make enemies," she warned him when she could speak. "I have survived stampedes, rattlesnakes, and sleeping on frozen ground," Mason said cheerfully. "I think I can handle some mean-spirited gossip. Besides, anyone who treats you poorly was never going to be my friend anyway." 2 months into their courtship, Mason invited Florence to visit the Triple Creek Ranch on a Sunday when the bakery was closed. She rode out with him in his wagon, watching the city give way to rolling hills covered in summer grass and scattered oak trees. The ranch sprawled across the landscape, prosperous and well-maintained, with cattle grazing in distant pastures and horses in a large corral near the barn. The ranch owner, Mr. Hutchinson, was a gruff man in his 60s who had built his spread through decades of hard work. He greeted Florence with courtesy that turned to genuine warmth when Mason explained her business. "A successful baker, are you?" Mr. Hutchinson said, his eyes lighting with interest. "My late wife used to bake, but I never mastered the skill. Maybe you could teach my cook some tricks." The boys complain about the biscuits constantly. Florence found herself discussing baking techniques with Mr. Hutchinson while Mason showed her around the ranch. The older man listened with real attention and asked if she might consider selling bread wholesale to the ranch for the Cowboys' meals. "We have 20 men working here full-time," he explained. "Good bread would boost morale considerably. I would pay fair prices and arrange weekly deliveries if you are interested." It was a substantial business opportunity, one that would require Florence to hire additional help, but would significantly increase her profits. She and Mr. Hutchinson shook hands on the agreement, and Mason watched with obvious pride. Later, Mason took her riding through the ranch's furthest pastures. Florence had not been on a horse since childhood, but Mason's patient instruction and steady presence made her feel safe. They rode to a high point overlooking miles of Texas landscape, hills rolling toward the horizon under an endless blue sky. "This is my favorite place," Mason said as they dismounted. "When I need to think or when the world feels too heavy, I come here. It reminds me how big everything is, how many possibilities exist beyond what people think should or should not be." Florence stood beside him, the wind tangling her hair, the sun warm on her face. "It is beautiful." "So are you," Mason said softly. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Florence, these past 2 months have been the best of my life. Every morning I wake up excited to see you. Every evening I count the hours until I can walk you home. You challenge me and comfort me and make me want to be better than I am." Her heart was beating so hard she thought he must hear it. "Mason, I know it is fast," he continued. "I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I am certain about this, about you, about us." He took both her hands, his gaze locked on hers. "Florence Kenway, will you marry me? Will you let me support your dreams while you support mine? Will you build a life with me where neither of us has to sacrifice who we are?" Tears spilled down Florence's cheeks. Every fear she had nursed, every doubt that had kept her awake at night, melted away in the warmth of his gaze. This man understood her. This man valued her. This man wanted her exactly as she was. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Mason, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that stole her breath. Florence kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pouring every lonely year and every frightened hope into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice." "I love you too," Florence said, the words feeling like breaking free from chains she had worn for years. "I did not think this was possible. I thought I would have to choose." "You never have to choose," Mason promised. "We are partners in everything from this moment forward." They set the wedding date for 6 weeks later, and the preparations revealed both the depth of Austin's disapproval and the unexpected pockets of support that existed. Florence's mother finally visited the bakery, her face tight with conflicting emotions. "Florence, are you certain about this?" she asked, her voice strained. "Mr. Garrett seems like a good man, but people are saying he is just as peculiar as you are. They say you will both be social outcasts." "Mother, I am already a social outcast," Florence said gently. "Mason accepts me as I am. He encourages my work instead of demanding I give it up. That is more important to me than social approval." Her mother looked around the bakery, really seeing it perhaps for the first time. The gleaming counters, the quality goods, the steady stream of customers. "You really have built something here, have you not?" "I have," Florence said. "And Mason wants to help me build it even bigger. He helped me negotiate the contract with his ranch. He suggested I hire Alice Morris to help in the kitchen so I can handle larger orders. He treats my business like it matters." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Your father would have been proud of you. I have been so worried about what people think that I forgot to be proud myself." "I am sorry, Florence." They embraced, mending cracks that had been growing for years. Her mother proved it by attending the wedding planning meetings and firmly telling Mrs. Patterson that her daughter was making an excellent match, regardless of what narrow-minded gossips thought. Other support came from unexpected sources. Alice Morris, a young widow struggling to support her 2 children, eagerly accepted Florence's job offer and proved to be a gifted baker. Mr. Chen spread word through Austin's growing Chinese community about Florence's fair dealing and good business sense, bringing her new customers who appreciated quality over gossip. Several ranch hands from Triple Creek started patronizing the bakery, their loud praise gradually shifting public opinion among the working men, who cared more about good food than social conventions. Mason's sister Charlotte traveled from Houston for the wedding, a lively young woman of 22 who hugged Florence like they were already family. "I am so glad Mason found you," she said earnestly. "He has been lonely for so long trying to make something of himself. You are perfect for him." The wedding took place in Austin's small Methodist church on a golden September afternoon. Florence wore a simple cream dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Mason wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the only person in the world. The ceremony was small, attended by those who genuinely cared rather than those who felt obligated. Charlotte stood as Florence's witness, while Mr. Hutchinson stood for Mason. Florence's mother wept quietly in the front pew. Alice Morris attended with her children, beaming with happiness. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, a tense silence fell. Florence held her breath, half expecting Mrs. Patterson to stand and proclaim their unsuitability. But no one spoke, and the minister smiled and continued. "Do you, Mason Garrett, take Florence Kenway to be your lawfully wedded wife, to honor and cherish in prosperity and challenge, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Mason said firmly, his eyes never leaving Florence's face. "Do you, Florence Kenway, take Mason Garrett to be your lawfully wedded husband, to honor and cherish in prosperity and challenge, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Florence said, her voice clear and strong. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Mason, you may kiss your bride. Mason cupped Florence's face in his hands and kissed her softly, reverently, sealing the promise they had made to each other. The small gathering applauded, and Florence felt joy burst through her chest like sunrise. They held a simple reception in the church hall, with food prepared by Mr. Chen and, of course, beautiful breads and cakes from Kenway's bakery. People ate and talked and toasted the new couple. Mr. Hutchinson gave a brief speech about the importance of partnerships built on mutual respect. Charlotte sang a beautiful song about love and new beginnings. As the sun set and guests began departing, Mason pulled Florence onto the small makeshift dance floor. They swayed together to music from a borrowed phonograph, her head resting against his chest, his arms secure around her waist. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Garrett?" he murmured against her hair. "Like the luckiest woman in Texas," Florence said honestly. "Like maybe the world is not as narrow as I thought it was." "The world is as big as we make it," Mason said, "and ours is going to be extraordinary." They spent their wedding night in a hotel in Austin, a rare luxury that felt impossibly romantic. Mason carried her over the threshold and set her down carefully, his hands trembling slightly as he cupped her face. "I have been waiting to truly touch you," he said roughly. "Wanting you has been slowly driving me mad." Florence reached up and pulled him into a kiss, all the passion and need she had been restraining finally breaking free. Mason responded with matching intensity, his hands tangling in her hair, his body pressing against hers. They made love with the desperate tenderness of two people who had been lonely too long and had finally found their home in each other. Afterward, Florence lay in Mason's arms, tracing patterns on his bare chest while he played with her unbound hair. "I was so afraid," she admitted quietly. "Afraid that this kind of happiness was not meant for women like me." "You deserve every happiness," Mason said fiercely. "And I am going to spend my life making sure you get it." True to his word, Mason proved to be not just a supportive husband but an active partner in Florence's dreams. He helped her expand the bakery's operations, using his business sense to identify new opportunities. When the railroad announced plans to extend through Austin, Mason encouraged Florence to bid for the contract to supply baked goods to the train station restaurant. She won the contract, a major achievement that required hiring 3 more employees and purchasing additional ovens. Florence discovered that being married to Mason meant having someone who celebrated her victories as if they were his own. When she landed the railroad contract, he swept her into his arms and spun her around the bakery kitchen, laughing with pure joy. When she struggled with the stress of managing expanded operations, he rubbed her shoulders and helped her think through solutions. When she woke at 3 in the morning worried about meeting demand, he got up and sat with her, drinking coffee and assuring her she had the skill to handle anything. In turn, Florence supported Mason's work at the Triple Creek Ranch. She learned about cattle breeding and grazing rotation, and the complex mathematics of running a successful ranching operation. When Mason dealt with difficult ranch hands or market fluctuations, she listened and offered perspective. When he came home exhausted from long days in the saddle, she made sure he ate well and rested properly. They built a life together that defied every convention Florence had been told was mandatory. She kept her bakery and her maiden name on the business license. Mason kept his demanding job as ranch foreman. They worked hard and came home to each other at the end of long days, sharing meals and conversation and physical affection that never dimmed. The town's attitude gradually shifted from disapproval to grudging acceptance to something approaching respect. It was hard to maintain moral superiority toward a couple who were clearly successful, devoted to each other, and contributing substantially to Austin's economy. Florence's bakery became an established Austin institution, employing 8 people and supplying half the restaurants in the city. Mason's work improved the Triple Creek Ranch's profitability significantly, earning him a reputation as one of the best foremen in Texas. A year into their marriage, Florence realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with complicated emotions: joy at creating a life with Mason, but fear about how a child would impact her business. She told Mason one evening after closing the bakery, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "I am pregnant," she said, watching his face carefully. "About 3 months along, I think." Mason's expression transformed into pure wonder. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was infinitely precious. "A baby," he breathed. "Florence, we are having a baby." "I know," she said. "But Mason, what about the bakery? I cannot give it up, but I do not know how to manage both." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "Then we figure it out together. Maybe Alice is ready to take on more management responsibility. Maybe we hire another baker so you can reduce your hours during the pregnancy. Maybe I talk to Mr. Hutchinson about adjusting my schedule so I can help more at home." He kissed her forehead gently. "We are partners, remember? That means we solve problems together. You do not have to sacrifice your work to be a mother." True to his word, Mason helped Florence develop a plan that allowed her to maintain her bakery while preparing for motherhood. Alice eagerly accepted a promotion to assistant manager, proving herself more than capable of handling daily operations. They hired an additional baker and a shop assistant. Florence reduced her hours during the difficult final months of pregnancy, but stayed involved in all major decisions. Their son was born on a warm April morning in 1884, arriving after a long labor that left Florence exhausted but exhilarated. Mason held their baby with tears streaming down his face, his expression one of absolute awe. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Florence, he is perfect." They named him Thomas, after Florence's father. Baby Thomas had Mason's dark hair and Florence's gray eyes, and a healthy set of lungs that he demonstrated frequently. Mason proved to be a devoted father, waking for nighttime feedings and changing diapers without complaint and spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the tiny life they had created together. Motherhood transformed Florence in unexpected ways, but it did not diminish her drive or her love for her work. With Mason's support and Alice's capable management, she maintained her bakery while also nurturing their son. It was exhausting and demanding, and sometimes she felt pulled in too many directions at once, but Mason was there at every turn, sharing the burden, celebrating the victories, reminding her that she did not have to be perfect at everything all the time. "You are allowed to be tired," he told her one evening when she broke down crying from exhaustion. "You are allowed to struggle. That does not mean you are failing. It means you are human." His understanding meant everything. So did the practical help he provided, taking over childcare duties when she needed to handle a crisis at the bakery, bringing Thomas to visit her at work so she could nurse him, never making her feel guilty for wanting both career and family. Thomas thrived, growing into a healthy, happy baby who seemed equally content in his mother's arms at the bakery or in his father's arms at the ranch. The employees at Kenway's bakery adored him, and the ranch hands at Triple Creek competed to make the baby smile. He was surrounded by love and exposed to both his parents' worlds, learning early that life held many possibilities. When Thomas was 2 years old, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news brought pure joy without the accompanying fear. She knew now that she could balance everything: that she did not have to choose between being a mother and maintaining her life's work. Their daughter arrived in the winter of 1886, a tiny, fierce creature they named Rose after Mason's mother. Rose had her mother's determination from the start, making her preferences known with powerful cries and grabbing at the world with determined fists. Mason fell instantly in love, declaring that their daughter would grow up knowing she could accomplish anything. Life settled into a rich, full rhythm. Florence managed her bakery with Alice's expert assistance, the business continuing to grow and evolve. Mason was promoted to ranch manager, a position that came with more responsibility and better pay. They purchased a small house with room for their growing family, close enough to town for Florence's work, but with enough land for horses and a large garden. The children grew up seeing both parents work hard at jobs they loved. Thomas showed an early interest in horses and ranching, following his father around whenever possible. Rose, true to her name, proved to have a stubborn, independent streak and a fascination with her mother's baking. She spent hours in the bakery kitchen, standing on a stool to help mix dough, her small face serious with concentration. The town that had once shunned Florence now held her up as a success story. Young women asked her advice about starting businesses. Mothers sought her counsel on balancing family and work. She never preached or claimed to have all the answers, but she was honest about the challenges and equally honest about the rewards. "It is not easy," she told a young woman who was considering opening a dress shop. "You will work harder than you ever imagined. People will judge you and question your choices. But if you have support and determination and genuine passion for what you want to build, it is possible. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Mason's support never wavered through the years. He remained her biggest champion, celebrating her achievements and weathering challenges by her side. They still made time for evening walks, still talked for hours about their days, still looked at each other with love that had only deepened over time. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason surprised Florence with a trip to San Antonio, arranging for Charlotte to watch the children. They stayed in a beautiful hotel and ate in fancy restaurants, and wandered through the city like young sweethearts without responsibilities. On their last evening, they sat by the river as the sun set, Mason's arm around Florence's shoulders. "Thank you," Florence said softly. "For what?" Mason asked. "For seeing me. For wanting all of me, not just the parts that fit someone else's expectations. For building a life with me where I never had to choose." Mason kissed her temple. "You never have to thank me for loving you exactly as you are. That has been the easiest thing I have ever done." "Still," she insisted, "what we have is rare. I know women who gave up everything they loved to get married. I know men who resent their wives for having dreams beyond the home. We are lucky." "We are not just lucky," Mason said firmly. "We are intentional. We chose to be partners. We chose to support each other. We chose to build something different." He turned to face her fully. "And I would choose you again every single day for the rest of my life." Florence kissed him, pouring a decade of love and gratitude into the connection. When they finally pulled apart, stars were emerging in the darkening sky, and the future stretched before them bright with possibility. They returned home to their children and their work and their life together. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. The bakery expanded again, eventually occupying 2 buildings and employing 15 people. Florence developed a reputation throughout Texas for quality and innovation. Her breads and pastries served in the finest establishments in Austin and beyond. Mason's career flourished as well. When Mr. Hutchinson retired, he sold the Triple Creek Ranch to Mason, recognizing in his former foreman the vision and dedication to carry on his legacy. Mason became one of the most respected ranchers in the region, known for fair treatment of his hands and smart management practices. Thomas grew into a young man who loved ranching as much as his father did, learning the business from the ground up. Rose proved to have her mother's head for business and her father's determination, taking over much of the bakery's operations by the time she was 20 and introducing new product lines that increased profits substantially. Florence and Mason watched their children grow with pride, knowing they had given them something precious, the example of a marriage built on mutual respect, of parents who pursued their passions without sacrificing their family, of a life where love and work could coexist beautifully. On quiet evenings, when the children were grown and gone to their own pursuits, Florence and Mason still sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over the Texas hills. Mason would hold her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin, and Florence would lean against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him against her side. "You have any regrets?" Mason asked one evening, his voice quiet in the gathering dusk. Florence thought about the question seriously, considering the life they had built together. The early struggles and the social condemnation and the exhaustion of building both a business and a family. The sacrifices and the compromises and the moments of doubt. "No," she said finally. "Not a single one. You gave me everything I wanted, Mason. Love and work and family and partnership. You showed me that I never had to choose." "You gave me the same," he said, kissing the top of her head. "A life richer than I ever imagined possible, a partner who challenges and inspires me. Children who are growing into remarkable adults. Every day with you has been a gift." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Behind them, their house glowed with lamplight, full of the life they had built together. Before them, the land stretched into darkness, familiar and beloved. Florence thought about the girl she had been, desperate and determined, convinced she would have to sacrifice love to pursue her dreams. She thought about the woman she had become, building both a successful business and a deeply satisfying marriage, proving that the world's limitations were not as fixed as everyone claimed. Most of all, she thought about Mason, the cowboy who had walked into her bakery one dusty morning and changed everything. The man who had looked at her ambitions and said, "Not choose, but choose me and keep everything else." The partner who had spent 15 years proving that love did not require sacrifice, only mutual support and unwavering commitment. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too," Mason replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." They remained on the porch until the moon rose high and silvered the landscape. Two people who had built something extraordinary together. Their love a testament to the power of choosing partnership over convention, support over control, and building a life where both people could flourish completely. Years later, when their grandchildren asked Florence about her life, she told them about the bakery she had built from nothing, about the social condemnation she had endured for choosing work over an early marriage, about the lonely years when she thought she would never find love. Then she would tell them about the morning a dusty cowboy walked through her door and saw her not as someone who needed to change, but as someone worth cherishing exactly as she was. She told them about Mason's proposal, about his promise that she could keep both her work and his love, about the life they had built on the foundation of that promise. "Your grandfather showed me that the right person does not ask you to sacrifice your dreams," she would say. "The right person helps you achieve them. He stood beside me when the town turned against us. He celebrated my successes as if they were his own. He shared the work of raising your parents so I could keep my business. He never once made me feel like I had to choose between being his wife and being myself." The grandchildren would listen, wide-eyed, to stories of a time when women running businesses was scandalous, when Florence's choices had made her an outcast. They would look at their grandmother, a successful businesswoman in her 60s, and their grandfather, still strong and devoted, and understand that what they had was special. Mason would add his own memories, talking about how Florence had challenged him to think differently, to question the assumptions he had grown up with, to build a marriage based on equality rather than tradition. He told them about watching Florence expand her business, about the pride he felt in her accomplishments, about learning that supporting his wife's dreams made him stronger rather than weaker. "Choose someone who wants you to shine," he would tell the grandchildren. "Choose someone who celebrates your victories and supports you through challenges. Choose someone who sees your potential and helps you reach it. That is what love looks like." As the years advanced and their hair silvered and their bodies slowed, Florence and Mason remained devoted to each other and to the life they had built. The bakery eventually passed entirely to Rose, who ran it with the same dedication and innovation her mother had shown. Thomas took over the ranch, managing it with his father's wisdom and integrity. Both children built marriages modeled on their parents' example, choosing partners who valued them as individuals rather than expecting conformity to rigid roles. Florence and Mason grew old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and the legacy of their unconventional choices. When Florence finally retired from active work at 70, Mason was there to celebrate with her, toasting the woman who had spent 5 decades proving that success had no gender. When Mason's health began to fail in his mid-70s, Florence sat by his side every day, holding his hand and reminding him of every adventure they had shared. He died peacefully on a spring morning with Florence beside him, the last words she heard from his lips a whispered, "I love you." Florence mourned him deeply, the loss of her partner leaving a hole nothing could fill. But she did not regret a single day of their life together, did not wish she had chosen differently, did not wonder what might have been. She had chosen love without sacrifice, partnership without submission, a life where she could be fully herself and fully committed to someone else. Mason had given her that gift, and she had treasured it every day of their decades together. Florence lived several more years, surrounded by family who adored her and a community that respected her achievements. When she passed away in her sleep at 78, the whole town mourned the loss of a woman who had helped redefine what was possible for women in Texas. They buried her beside Mason, their headstones simple but their legacy profound. The bakery that Florence had built still operated, now in its 4th generation of family management. The ranch Mason had made successful still thrived under their grandson's care. But more than those tangible achievements, they left behind proof that love could exist without requiring someone to diminish themselves. That partnership could mean 2 strong people supporting each other rather than one person dominating another. Their story became legend in Austin, told to young women who feared they could not have both career and family, to young men who wanted to build marriages based on equality, to anyone who needed proof that the world's expectations could be challenged and overcome. She was shunned for choosing work over a husband. A cowboy said, "Choose me and keep your work." And together, they built a love story that lasted a lifetime, proving that the right person never asks you to choose, but instead helps you have everything your heart desires.